Trump is now testing how much of a dictatorship his Republicans will let him start. The obvious reality about Attorney General designate Beavis and Botox and Health and Human Services Secretary designate Sideshow Bobby Kennedy, because Dr. Mengele is unavailable, is that whatever happens next, Trump will not withdraw Gaetz's nomination or Kennedy's nomination or any of the other nominations. He will not compromise. He is not playing three-dimensional chess. These creatures and the other psychotics have been chosen because they are unacceptable, because they are unqualified, because they are unbalanced. This is Trump saying he doesn't care about any of that. Trump does not think he's overplayed his hand. Trump knew the House ethics report into Gaetz's sex life was going to come out, as it already did yesterday when ABC reported that the woman who testified to the House hearing said she had sex with Gaetz when she was 17. Trump doesn't care. Trump cares whether or not she was hot. Just like his only reaction to the RFK Jr. Olivia Nuzzi story was to consider consoling her ex-fiancé. In an entirely different way, though, he cares about one thing. If he ever answers a media question again, he will say the ABC leak about Gaetz or the full committee report, if it leaks, is fake, and it's a witch hunt, and they are all lying, and only he tells the truth, and ultimately it's just another attack on him. And he is going to make it and the Kennedy nomination into a life or death loyalty test for his cult and his slaves. And as much as I hate every last Republican lawmaker, I almost feel sorry for them right now. Trump is going to demand they approve Gaetz as Attorney General and Kennedy at HHS and maybe Patel at FBI anyway. Or at minimum, he's going to demand that the Senate gets out of the way with recess appointments instead of hearings. That's the plan. The plan is I decide and you do what I say. We are already here. This is the fork in the fascist road. Deliberately choose people with no morals, no qualifications, and no qualities except absolute fealty to the dictator that insist that everybody say they're great. Let's salute them. Same for this woman, Noem. Same for the disgusting Gabbard. Same for this pig, Hegseth. Same for him naming all his personal attorneys to key roles at DOJ. And it will probably work. It has so far. The Republicans in charge of this country got to be in charge of this country by not caring about this country, nor caring about anything else but power. If it doesn't, if there really are 30 votes against the nomination of Matt Gaetz in the Senate, and there actually is a hearing, and Matt Gaetz actually is defeated, then there is an entirely new ballgame in this country. Then Trump has been humiliated and defeated entirely by his own side. And Republicans, whether it is 4 of them or 40 of them, will have set boundaries, or maybe more than boundaries. Once the momentum of a dictatorship in the formation is stopped, it can be destroyed. This could be existential for Trump. It is amazing that this perverted, slimy, pompadoured, effete Madison Cawthorn wannabe and the rotting, literally worm-eaten corpse of Robert F. Kennedy Jr. could unintentionally be the things that preserve or destroy American democracy. But that's where we're going, and we don't have far to get there. Oh, and by the way, that rule, do not obey in advance. First, the Washington Post obeyed in advance. Now it's CNN. Oliver Darcy of Status Report now says the new boss of what used to be a news network has told a company-wide town hall that CNN will not revert back to the wall-to-wall coverage of the Trump White House that defined it in its previous life. Go deeper, he said, according to Darcy, and report on the impact that policies decided on in Washington have on the rest of the country. There's more to life than these inside the Beltway stories, like the destruction of democracy The new boss is named Mark Thompson. He is another washout from the toxic world of British journalism where they could not care less. He is a Matt Gaetz, Bobby Kennedy, Cash Patel kind of guy in terms of what he cares about in life, not being what he does for a living. He's not a journalist. He's a man who bosses journalists. If this were the summer of 1863 and there had been a CNN, Mark Thompson in charge of it would be saying, less Gettysburg, mate, less Civil War, more about the price of firewood, and the next tour of the singer Jenny Lind. The future of the country? That's just a story. So, if after this litmus test, I'm Trump and I'm appointing not my horse like Caligula, but my whores, you will still obey me and approve them. If it's not Trump that has been destroyed, but democracy, we then move on to the next step. Trump then confirming in the near future that no, Wednesday in front of the House Republican caucus, no, he was not joking. He believes he is entitled to a third term, and you are going to give it to him. And I have a lot about that story. It is a House bill, and the Republicans control the House, and so it will not pass the House, because Republicans in the House have even fewer morals than Republicans in the Senate. But at least Democratic Congressman Dan Goldman has stood up and said this. He has proposed a formal House resolution, quote, which would reaffirm that the 22nd Amendment is explicit in prohibiting presidents who have served 2 full terms from running for the presidency again, and condemn President-elect Trump's frequent statements suggesting he could serve past the end of his most recent term. What we really need, is that statement proposed and passed in the Senate, while the Senate is still in Democratic hands. But I'm sure that before doing that, Senate Judiciary Chairman Durbin would need to study those words for 30 to 40 years. In any event, do not sleep on the Trump third term idea. I'm begging you. After Congressman Goldman introduced that measure, he was greeted by a surprisingly large number of reactions from the left that mirrored the reactions that I got yesterday to my coverage of Trump's slow burn towards running for a third term if he isn't dead by then. He's joking, he's not joking, he's running, he's president again for a third term. That's the sequence. The gist of the reaction to this is, why are you wasting time on this topic when it's a moot point and the 22nd Amendment to the Constitution limits the president to 2 terms? Well, sir, the Constitution also bars anybody who participated in an insurrection from serving in office. The 14th Amendment is explicit about that. In fact, the 14th Amendment was used in New Mexico against one of the January 6th gang, and yet here we are, the head of that gang, Trump, set to be sworn in as president 67 days from now. The Supreme Court will say what the 22nd Amendment to the Constitution actually says. And of course, it will have been Trump who will have told them what to say it actually says. And since last spring, the fascists have been field testing exactly how best to go around the 22nd Amendment and get Trump, if he isn't dead by then, a third term. The headline last spring in the magazine The American Conservative, Trump 2028. The subheadline to this piece, the 22nd Amendment is an arbitrary restraint on presidents who serve non-consecutive terms and on democracy itself. The Republicans started joking and tweaking and triggering the left with variations on this theme ever since Trump himself mused in 2018 that he was owed a third term, because during his first term, he had been preoccupied with defending his, crimes against the United States of America. Then there was the jokey animation, the Trump 2020 campaign banner, followed by a Trump 2024 campaign banner, followed by a Trump 2028 campaign banner, followed by a Trump 2032 campaign banner, and on and on and on until it was a 102-year-old Trump running in 2048, and nobody was wondering if he'd be dead by then and running from a coffin because, after all, it was just a joke. They're only doing this to own the libs. Except that's not what they're doing. Quoting author in the American Conservative, Peter Tonguette, I swear to God that's his name, Tonguette, quoting Tonguette on Trump, his reemergence as the Republican nominee in 2024 is a triumph of democracy. Not only did Trump secure the nomination following his defeat in 2020, a rather incredible feat in and of itself, but did so in spite of every obstacle the mainstream media, the Republican establishment, and the lawfare apparatus have put in his way. You see where this is going. Trump overcame obstacles. Or, if you prefer, Trump overcame the law and the Constitution. And Trump overcame mediocrity and weaponized stupidity and hatred inside his own party. Therefore, the Constitution shouldn't apply to him. He's spatial. Especially that part of the Constitution that has those pesky term limits in it. That 22nd Amendment shouldn't apply to him. Republican primary voters, quote, chose him, writes Mr. Tonguette in the American Conservative, quote, because they damn well felt like it. That's the American way. The 22nd Amendment, you get 2 full terms or 1.5 if you're serving out another president's term. Quote, sounds reasonable enough, especially in light of FDR's hold on the office. Yet those who supported the amendment more than 70 years ago could not have foreseen the prospect of a one-term president who lost the office but who later regained it in a subsequent election. The author then immediately cites that exact thing happening. He immediately mentions the time that exact thing happened, when Grover Cleveland, the ex-president, came all the way back to being president again in 1892. And the author also leaves out in this idea that nobody could have foreseen anything like Trump, that while he may see this as something from prehistory, when dinosaurs still had the vote or something, the 22nd Amendment was in fact introduced by a Michigan congressman named Earl Michener. Earl Michener was 16 years old and already preparing for University of Michigan Law School when Grover Cleveland was first elected. Earl Michener, in just his lifetime, not only saw Cleveland reelected after 4 years in the wilderness, but he'd also seen former President Theodore Roosevelt try for a third non-consecutive term in 1912. He had seen the Republican bid to draft former President Calvin Coolidge to run for a third non-consecutive term instead of President Herbert Hoover in 1932. He had seen Hoover himself try for nomination for a second non-consecutive term in 1936 and again in 1940. Oh, and Michener has also seen Franklin Roosevelt run for a third term and get it, and run for a fourth term and get it. And he'd seen William Jennings Bryan get the Democratic nomination in 1896 and 1900, and having not had enough, run for it again in 1908, and even begin to try to get it again for a fourth time in 1912. Michener, the congressman behind presidential term limits, only saw all that unfold in one lifetime. But nobody could have foreseen an ex-president regaining the White House, other than everybody who did. As to the audacity that the Constitution would prohibit his Trumpness from running again in 2028, even though he's so special, quoting Mr. Tonguette again, this is plainly unfair. Even though the uniqueness it bestows upon him. He was elected. He was not reelected. He tried to overthrow democracy. He failed even at that. Well, that's rather akin to, we should break the rules for him. He shot a guy on Fifth Avenue, and they all applauded. The author promptly uses for support for his argument two-term presidents who each said something doubting the 22nd Amendment and the, quote, artificial limits it places on voter choice. Even though those two presidents were Reagan, who love him or hate him, did win 2 landslides, and Barack Obama, who won the 21st century equivalent of 2 landslides, while Trump won once with a minority of the popular vote, and then this month produced the 50th biggest popular margin of victory in history, or if you prefer, the 5th smallest. But to quote Mr. Tunget again, Trump, however, makes an even more forceful ethical argument against the 22nd Amendment and for its repeal. If a man who once was president returns after a series of years to stand again for the office and proves so popular as to earn a second non-consecutive term, as Trump seems bound to deny him the right to run for a second consecutive term cuts against basic fair play, unquote. The basic fair play argument. Alexander Hamilton thought that up, if I recall correctly. Or was it George Hamilton? Quote, if by 2028 voters feel Trump has done a poor job, they can pick another candidate. But if they feel he has delivered on his promises, why should they be denied the freedom to choose him once more? Unquote. Well, if he really has delivered on his promises, what makes you think they will get the chance to deny him another term or a fourth one after that? But that's besides the point just for the moment. This is Trump's legal-looking version of trying to stay in office for life. We'll get to the illegal point later on, I'm sure. There follows in this piece some hurried sophistry. Quote, don't let questions of Trump's age in 4 years fool you, and his ability to walk in a straight line, and how in 2032 he'd only be 86. I mean, true, he'd be spray-tanned, rested, and ready, having not used his brain in more than 12 years. The best part of the American conservative piece by Mr. Tunget, positing Trump deserves a theoretical third term, even though it's, unconstitutional, is how fluidly this idiot, having not come close to proving his case, then concludes he has utterly proved his case in a slam dunk. And so you better shut up and enjoy it. Quote, conservatives have gritted their teeth for years as the left, in their hatred of Trump, has attempted to pervert the meaning of the 22nd Amendment, unquote. Which Democrats haven't, because nobody has previously raised the possibility that the 22nd Amendment, which precludes a third term, actually encourages a third term. Only this guy, Mr. Tunget. It's interesting, by the way, that a man named Tunget would use the phrase gritted their teeth. Democrats have not tried to pervert the meaning of the 22nd Amendment, because if they had, they would have found a pretext to run Obama for a third term in 2016, or in 2020, or, this month, or 4 years from now. Quoting again, the case for repealing the 22nd Amendment is far more straightforward. As with prohibition, it is simply a matter of finding the will to get rid of a bad idea that needlessly limits Americans' freedom. Trump 2028! Exclamation point. So this guy is saying it would be a triumph of the will? Triumph of the Will. Like the Leni Riefenstahl Adolf Hitler film from 1935. Got it. Well, can't spell Triumph of the Will without Trump. Where, you might ask, in this article is the process by which the 22nd Amendment is repealed? Well, sir, there is none. The Roberts Court disqualifying vote against the 14th and its invention of a non-existent congressional action to implement the 14th Amendment, when in fact the 14th Amendment insists there must be congressional action only to override it, that is shown as the green light for a very simple Republican plan if Trump isn't dead by 2028 and they want to run him again, as he doubtless will want to run again. And the plan is this. They just do it. and then they dare you to sue. They run him. They, to again use the author's phrase, run him because they damn well feel like it. They string out the nominating process just long enough so that the court cases don't really become relevant until late spring or summer, and when the Supreme Court finally gets around to it in July or August, right at 2028 convention time, the court will have to tisk the political system and say that to strike Trump from the ballot at such a late date would be an unthinkable denial of the rights of millions of fascists, some of whom were 5 when he first declared for the nomination, to vote for him again because of the Constitution's no fair rule. But certainly you say, if suddenly Trump can run for a third term, the third term thing would not apply just to Trump. The Republicans have missed a small detail, haven't they? Suddenly Barack Obama, who would be 67 in 2028, and Bill Clinton, who would still be 2 months younger than Trump, they would be eligible to run for their own third terms. Not so fast. What the Trumpists are setting up is a Supreme Court ruling that only presidents who have served 2 non-consecutive terms can seek a third. Literally, the only other person in human history this would apply to would be Grover Cleveland. Grover Cleveland was a Democrat, but he's been dead since 1907. So, even if we dig him up and run him for a third non-consecutive term, he'd be almost as mentally incompetent as Donald Trump is now. Remember, before you get lost in Gaetz and the rest of these idiots and the next Trump outrage, that Trump declared he was running for re-election literally before he was sworn in 2017. He will probably be more circumspect this time because this is a big deal. Even the New York Times would probably notice that him going for a third term would be the absolute point of no return towards dictatorship. Probably they'd notice. But Trump is building towards it. And if this thing in the American Conservative is not enough of a warning, there are other articles springing up online with ambiguous titles. And when I say ambiguous, I mean not at all ambiguous. Titles like, "The 22nd Amendment doesn't say what you think it says." These articles offer not only ways to ignore the 22nd Amendment, but additional workarounds, like electing a different Republican ticket in 2028, the Lurleen-Wallace option. You elect 2 other idiots, president and vice president, and then you make Trump Speaker of the House, which is legal. And then you get the newly elected Republican president and vice president to both resign, making Speaker Trump president still for a third term. These, compared to the 22nd Amendment stuff, read like rejected scripts from the West Wing. But then again, so does all of American political history since the year 2015. The point of this is, yes, Gaetz is a disaster. Gabbard is worse, bad enough that our European allies are already murmuring that they would have to stop sharing intelligence with the Director of National Intelligence in this country. Hegseth is ready to deploy U.S. troops against U.S. citizens on U.S. soil. These are all true things, but don't take your eye off the big ball. Trump's mission, his sole purpose, his only means of staying literally alive is to find a way to stay in office forever. Period. And Peter Tungitz's essay in The American Conservative was the sound of Trump's GPS being switched on to help him find that way. And if you need one last confirmation of that, of the importance of this, of how it is not a moot point, of how the 22nd Amendment will be reread to indicate that it's about making lollipops illegal, if that's what Trump wants it to say. If you want one last confirmation, here it is. Lisa Needham at the site Public Notice connected the final dots. Remember the name of the magazine that Mr. Tunget wrote this for? The American Conservative? Quote, the American Conservative is a partner of Project 2025. As promised, at least 2 countdowns a week going forward. Mondays and Thursdays, definitely more as circumstances warrant and permit. This was one of those circumstances. You're welcome. The next scheduled edition is Monday. Until then, I'm Keith Olbermann. Good night and good luck.